President of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria, Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, good afternoon. It is a great honor for me to be here. I am very humbled. When I received the invitation to address this conference and receive a blessing, I was very pleasantly surprised, not least because I am not, to put it mildly, the best advertisement for a good Catholic. For many years I did not attend Mass for many complicated reasons, and yet I have been invited to be here. This invitation says something to me about the generosity of spirit of this Conference of Nigerian Bishops, and I am deeply, deeply grateful. I have always admired the role that Nigerian Catholic bishops have played in consistently advocating for good governance and defending the rights of Nigerian citizens from the time of our military dictatorships to this present ostensible democracy. Thank you. And so I am very happy to be here, and I think of myself as an uncertain prodigal, standing before the fathers of our ancient faith. I grew up in Nsukka, on the campus of the University of Nigeria. My father, Professor James Adichie, was a dedicated Catholic. My father would often say, and I'm going to say this in the dialect of my hometown, Ijelo Father, Ijelo Anglican, Idoado. And it translates to, if you don't go to the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church, then sit at home. I actually think that my father added the Anglican part as an act of insincere diplomacy, because he really believed the Catholic Church was the only church that anyone should attend. But he was not dogmatic. He was open-minded and moderate and kind, and his vision of God was similar. I was raised by him and by my mother, who herself was also a keen Catholic. We attended St. Peter's Chaplaincy, then run by the Spiritan Congregation. I loved going to Mass, and I soon memorized all the words of the liturgy. And I used to wonder why the priest saying Mass still needed to look at the book, because as he spoke, I would speak silently along with him, but from memory. I was a precocious child, and I read very widely, and I read books about the Catholic Church. I remember once taking a book from my father's study called The Pope's Divisions, and I read it in my room, and I didn't know my father knew that I had taken it until the day I finished it and put it back in his study. And then he asked me a little impishly, "So, how many divisions has the Pope?" Which was the question that Joseph Stalin said to have asked at the end of the Second World War, and was the basis for the book title. I took that question to be my father's way of encouraging my intellectual curiosity, not just about the church, but about everything. As a teenager, I was a self-styled Catholic apologetic. There were always arguments between the Catholic and the Protestant children, and I always spoke for the Catholics. I used words I had read about, big words like transubstantiation and magisterium. And I always won the argument for the Catholics because, of course, the other children did not know what the words meant. Now, what the other children did not know was that I didn't fully understand what the words meant either. And I also didn't fully understand the larger context of the doctrine behind them. I had many questions and few answers. I memorized the little orange book, The Catechism of Christian Doctrine, and I enjoyed catechism classes, but they were caged in a certain kind of convention. I remember asking about the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin when I read how relatively recent it was made dogma. Was it necessary? What about all the years when it wasn't supposed to be believed by Catholics? I asked the Reverend Brother who taught us catechism, and I was quickly hushed. Now, had the Reverend Brother told me that yes, it became dogma in 1950, but the belief had been held by Christians for centuries, it would have perhaps helped quell my doubts. but I was told not to ask questions. It is very important that Catholic leadership stay close to young Catholics, especially those young Catholics who have questions, and many do. Often, they do not ask because they know that they will be silenced. Young people should be encouraged to ask questions of faith, and their questions deserve to be engaged with in very frank and honest ways. It is important to acknowledge our diverse journeys to faith, our diverse journeys of faith. Some of us are fortunate to be without doubt, and some of us struggle daily with the burden of doubt. When the questions of young people about Catholic doctrine are silenced, it leaves a hollow space in their hearts, and that hollow space is then very easily occupied by the slick and easy evangelizing of Pentecostal churches. I was not only a sensitive child interested in books, but I was also interested in questions of justice. And so when I heard of a lovely and devout couple banned from receiving Holy Communion in my hometown because their daughter had married an Anglican, I thought it both an uncharitable and unchristian act. I asked questions about it. Why are they responsible for the actions of their involved daughter? What about their love of God and their love of the church and the way they always sit in front at Mass and always attend benediction? In response, I was told that it was something called canon law. It was incidents like this that made me begin to feel that too often in the church, there was a primacy of law over love. Later, when St. Peter's chaplaincy was no longer run by the Spiritan congregation, it became a place singularly obsessed with women's clothing. This was a time when exam malpractice was becoming so normalized in Nsukka that students would refer to professors as wicked. And by wicked, they meant that the professors had refused to accept money for grades. And yet, all the Catholic Church on campus seemed obsessed with was women's clothes. They stopped women at the door of the church, even grandmothers. At the back of the bulletin and taped on the walls were admonitions about clothes. One memorable line that I don't think I will ever forget is, women should not wear crossed nail butter. I found it unbecoming. Of course, appropriate dressing should be worn to Mass, and the truth is that appropriate dressing was worn to Mass, especially by elderly women, but even they were now expected to wrap shawls around their bare arms. Nobody seemed to ask how these women felt. These women were fair human beings, equal before God, but were being made to keep themselves uncomfortable with the seeming comfort of men. Because I asked what this policy was about, and I was told, so that men are not distracted. I found this to be demeaning not only to women, but also to men, because the church did not seem to think that men could exercise any kind of self-control. Last year, the editor of L'Osservatore Romano asked me to write a reflection on Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti. I declined, as I did not think I had anything useful to say. I had not gone to Mass in years, and I felt alienated from the church. When the editor came back some months later to ask me if I would reconsider, this time I said yes, because I did have something to say. By then, my life had changed forever. My beloved parents had died, both unexpectedly, and my mother too soon after my father. I remain deeply shaken and disoriented by grief, even as I stand here today. Everything I once thought solid seems suddenly to melt and to feel meaningless. And it was in that state of grief that my siblings and I had encounters with the parish priest of my hometown, encounters that left me deeply wounded. The loss of a loved one leaves you at your most fragile, and it is at that point that you deserve the most kindness from the church. Kindness should be part of the job description of Catholic leadership. Some people are born kind, but kindness can also be learned. Life is difficult in Nigeria. People are looking for hope to carry on, to keep going, and people need kindness to be at the center of religion. I remember how, when I was growing up, we always left Mass at St. Peter's feeling better than when we came. Not because the sermons were always overly rousing or anything, but because of the air in the church, because of the world view of the church. It was a church that practiced love, and it was a church that kept the law, but when it had to choose, it always chose love over law. The experience of my siblings and I during my parents' funerals was the opposite of love. I found myself thinking, if this priest were in America, he would not slap a mass server at the altar. He would not verbally attack me during my mother's funeral. He would not scream at my cousin just because she was begging him for a date for the funeral. So what is it about the Nigerian Catholic space that makes this kind of priestly excess possible? Of course, I do not mean to generalize. I gave a well-known talk called The Danger of a Single Story, and so I know the perils of generalizing. And yet, we know as Nigerians that very few of us are 419 fraudsters, but we also know how all of us have been tainted by 419. Just try getting a visa, or try and do business in Europe or America, and the negative reputation of Nigeria will hang heavily on you. And so the action of even one priest matters. Sometimes people have said to me, the priest has nothing to do with your faith. Just focus on your faith. But how can we be asked to reserve for the priest an outsized respect, even reverence, and yet not expect from the same priest a measure of responsibility? If a priest is blessed with the power to act in persona Christi, to give divine birth through baptism, to forgive the ugliest of sins, to steer souls back to their God at their deathbed, to turn bread into flesh, then surely these come with a measure of expectation. And if the priest does not matter, it is then only natural to ask, what then is the point of going to Mass? We might as well pray at home or organize fellowships. The priest matters. The conduct of one priest can form the opinion of a person about the church. When a priest is, for example, overly obsessed with money, ambushes parishioners to collect money, shouts at the congregation about money, refuses to bury the indigent dead for owing as little as 500 naira, it matters. It is true that we have become in Nigeria a society of crass materialism, but the church can and should be a bulwark against that kind of crass materialism. When I was growing up, a man in my hometown became suddenly very wealthy. People shunned him. Where is the money from? People asked, because they knew it was not clean money. Today, the same man will be asked to chair the harvest and bazaar, even though it will be obvious to everyone that his money is not clean. I do not want a poor church. I believe in supporting the church. But if you ask average Catholics anecdotally and encourage them to tell you honestly, they will invariably have a few stories about priests they consider too obsessed with money. I do not mean to suggest that I expect perfection from priests. In fact, quite the opposite. It might help us to emphasize more the flawed humanity of priests, so that they may be less likely to be seen as mini-gods, which is what makes tyranny possible. My first novel, Purple Hibiscus, is in some ways about how important it is to recognize and even celebrate that priests are human, that priests are kind and fall in love and play football, but are still good priests. The novel is very much an ode to my childhood and to Catholicism. It is about many things, the different kinds of Catholicism, the colonial roots of African Catholicism, and a more progressive strain that is complementary with Igbo culture. When I first published the novel almost 20 years ago, My American editor in New York told me that she did not think the novel would do well. And she said, I don't think the Catholic theme is interesting to people. And also, I don't think it's going to do well because we put in some African words in it. By which she meant that I had characters who spoke Igbo, and I put bits of Igbo in the book because I thought it was important to try and portray the texture of the world that I was writing about. And so the novel was published, and much to her surprise, and to my surprise, it very quickly became an independent bestseller. And so for me, it is proof that in fact, a Catholic theme is a good one for a novel. Grief is a cruel kind of education. I am learning so much in these months of mourning, and I'm also unlearning so much. I too love the Catholic Church. It is a complicated love, shadowed by disappointment, strained by distance, but no less genuine for having these qualities. I come from love. I act from love. My article in the Osservatore Romano was also an act of love. Broken-hearted love, but love nonetheless. A friend told me that another friend of hers told her, tell Chimamanda to stop writing negative things about the church. And when this friend asked what he had found negative about the article, the response was, well, I didn't read it, but I heard she said negative things about the church. Some of us Nigerians have the extraordinary ability of having strong opinions about articles that we have not read. But it is also because so few of us read properly these days, our attention spans are much shorter, and so people will scan the headline, and often the headlines themselves are sensationalized. What I said about the church and money was reduced to inaccurate headlines that ignored nuance and context. The poet Rilke is perhaps right in saying that fame is the sum of all the misunderstandings that surround a person. I'm not interested in positive and negative, I'm interested in the truth. I wrote about what I see as the problems of the church because I hoped that it would be read and would bring about some kind of change, no matter how small. I wrote it not to discredit the church, but to make the case that we can do better, we should do better. I wrote it because I love the church. Finally, my love for the church and my slow return to its rituals has led to a resurgence in my heart of that protectiveness of the Catholic apologetic. I am again becoming a tribal Catholic. And this time, it is on the subject of Pentecostal churches. I wish Pentecostals well. We are all Christians. But I have noticed in urban centers of Nigeria, particularly in Lagos, something rather unfortunate. In the encroaching wave of Pentecostalism, there is now a kind of diffidence among Catholics, young cosmopolitan Catholics. Recently, I spoke to young people at the nursery school, and I was asked to pray. At the start of my prayer, I very deliberately and slowly made the sign of the cross. At the end of my short, and I suspect inadequate prayer, I said, through Christ our Lord. And afterwards, a few Catholics came to me to say that I was very brave to be so openly Catholic in a mixed gathering like that. That they would usually say, in Jesus' name. And they would not make the sign of the cross because they wanted to keep the Pentecostals comfortable. Too many educated urban Nigerians do not wear their Catholicism as they should, like a basic dress, brightly, proudly, frequently. Some Catholic churches compete with Pentecostals, but they make the mistake of doing so on Pentecostal terms. The Catholic Church cannot win on glossy words and prosperity preaching because that is not its remit. Nigerians like to use the expression, selling your market. We Catholics can sell our market better, and we can do it only by remaining resolutely Catholic. The sign of the cross might make a few people uncomfortable, but the more we do it, the more ordinary and normalized it becomes. And if our rituals become normalized, perhaps fewer young Catholics will leave the church in search of the shiny benedictions of Pentecostalism. And I want to end by saying that it feels really lovely to say we Catholics in this room, standing before the fathers of our ancient faith. Once again, I thank you very much for this invitation.